Para el cierre de nuestro evento nos acompañará el destacado educador, autor, investigador y asesor de políticas educativas finlandés, el señor Pasi Sahlberg. Es autor de un bestseller sobre el modelo educativo en Finlandia. Ha abordado ampliamente el tema de la enseñanza y el aprendizaje en la escuela, el trabajo y la educación de los maestros, el cambio educativo, los problemas de educación internacional y el futuro de las escuelas. Sus planteamientos lo han hecho merecedor de múltiples premios relacionados al mundo de la educación. Recibamos al señor Pasi Sahlberg con su presentación Repensando la educación, lección del modelo de educación finlandés.
Hello everybody, this is Pasi Sahlberg. I'm speaking to you from Sydney, Australia. Thank you very much for having me in this very important conference. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm not Australian. I am originally from Finland, where I was born and raised, went to school and spent the most of my working life there as well. And today I'm going to speak to you about my own country. I'm going to speak to you about what we could learn from the Finland's education experience. My purpose here is really to, firstly, to try to make sure that we all would understand Finnish education correctly. And I'm saying this because there is quite a number of misunderstandings and myths and fake news, if you wish, about what Finnish education is, why everybody is talking about that, and certainly what we could learn from that. I also try to inspire you a little bit in the Dominican Republic education community to take the opportunity of this very unusual time that we are right now living in here in Australia and Finland and over there. That is offering us opportunities to rethink education in a new ways. So I will speak a little bit about where we came from to this situation in the Finnish education. I had to look at the history a little bit. Then I'm going to mention a few things that we have learned overall in education, global education community during the last 10, 20 years, really. And then I will leave you with some ideas, some insights and thoughts for you to work on. And my main message really here is that nobody should try to imitate or copy any other education system, hoping that it would give better education, better schools and teaching and learning for young people in schools, including there in a Dominican. I think what we really need to do is to understand what is happening in other countries and then try to build, as I say, build your own Finland, if you wish, over there. So let me start now, and there will be time for a few questions in the end, and I hope that you will enjoy my talk here. I really speak to you from my experience. As I said, I've been a teacher and teacher educator and policy expert, researcher in Finland for many years, and I've written a lot of many articles and books about this. So I try to share with you some of those insights. So now, you know, if this was a conference 20 years ago, let's assume for a moment that we are sitting somewhere. Of course, the coronavirus was not an issue, so we would be probably somewhere in a conference room, and this was an international conference. So who were the international guests who were invited to speak and share their wisdom? We probably would see many people from the United States, from England, from Australia, New Zealand, certainly, some Nordic countries, maybe Sweden, Norway, Germany, France. They all would be sharing their own thoughts and ideas how to make schools work, how to give good education for children. There would be nobody from Finland, I can tell you that, because 20 years ago, very few people actually knew anything about Finnish education or Finland in the first place. Most people thought that Finland is a place where sun never shines and it's always cold and a lot of snow and ice. And they probably have not really an education system there at all. This is my experience in the 1990s when I was traveling around the world and trying to talk about my country that nobody was really that much interested in. But in year 2000, something important happened globally, because the OECD, that is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, released for the first time the results of the brand new international project called PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. And there were a lot of expectations in launching these first results in the year 2000. Actually, it was 2001. So many countries were hoping that they will be on the top of these new international charts with their education systems. Those that I mentioned earlier had expectations to be on the top. And I clearly remember that in Finland, we had no such expectations at all regarding where Finland would be in this first PISA study. Actually, we just had one wish, and we hoped that we would be better than Sweden. And I'm saying this, of course, because Sweden is our dear Western neighbor, and we often compete and race against one another in a kind of a humorous and friendly, brotherly fashion. But that was the only expectation we had, that if we are better than Sweden, then everything is fine. And this is what you see there. There is the year 2000, the first results of the OECD's PISA study. You can see that Finland, against all the expectations, was on the top of the charts, and Sweden was there somewhere in the middle, just like other Nordic countries. And I can tell you this, that this was a huge surprise in my country. I was at the University of Helsinki working as a professor that time, and none of us there could explain how is it possible that Finnish school system, when we were measuring the reading, mathematics and science of the 15-year-olds, all of a sudden was on the top of the world in this new OECD's metric. So we started to think about how to explain this, and it was really hard for somebody like myself, doing research and policy work in Finland for many years, or my colleagues in schools or other universities. And we came into one conclusion. We said that maybe the OECD has made a mistake with Finland and measured incorrectly what our schools actually are all about. So we didn't do too much. We kind of agreed among ourselves that let's wait 3 more years when the next OECD's PISA study comes around and see what happens then, that maybe OECD will correct its mistake and announce that Finland is somewhere there where it belongs to, together with the other Nordic countries, somewhere in the middle. And 2003 study, when it came around, the situation was the same. Finland was again performing very well now in mathematics, but we still thought that this is not possible. This is not what we expect the Finnish school system to do, and we decided to wait for another 3 years to see what happens when the science results come out in 2006. So came the 2006, and again Finland had actually improved the performance compared to the 2 earlier rounds. And it's only then, after 2006, when in Finland we had to kind of conclude that maybe we had done something differently. Maybe the Finnish system is a little bit different than all those other systems that were hoping to perform better than others. So we started to ask questions, and at the same time, these questions were asked also by many colleagues around the world, that what makes some education systems perform well? What could explain the good performance in Finland and in many of the Canadian provinces and some other countries? But we also asked the question that why some of those education systems that was earlier mentioned, who thought to be performing well, have not been able to make any progress. Actually, many of them have gone worse. What might explain these behaviors? And we have to understand one thing here is that education system is a complex social system. And in complex social systems, it's very difficult to say what is behind some particular behaviors or performances of the system. In other words, it's difficult to establish the causal relation and link between events. For example, in education, it's very hard to say that some education systems are performing well because they have better curriculum, or they have different types of teachers, or they're spending more money in education. Those relationships in complex social systems are very fragile, and we should avoid kind of too quick conclusions. Instead, I think what we need to conclude, and this is what I try to tell you a little bit about, that the performance in education systems, whether it's a good performance or kind of a poor performance, is often because a number of factors. It's because of the network of connected factors that explain these things. So now, of course, the question was about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, what does it take to build a world-class education system? What do we need to do to improve teaching and learning in our schools so that each and every child would learn better, and that every child would have a fair go in the system? So these two questions are critically important, and Finland, in a way, has been part of answering this question, not entirely, but together with some other countries and a number of researchers and scholars around the world, have helped to understand, first of all, why some education systems haven't been able to make significant progress. And this is what if we look at the results, the early results of the PISA, or overall the progress during the last 20 years. There are a number of countries who have been trying hard. They have put a lot of money into education reforms and changes in schools, but still the learning outcomes have not gone significantly better. So it's a fair question that why is this? What is behind this? And again, there are a number of things. I'm just going to very quickly mention you some of these. The most common things, it's not only from my research, this is the research from many of my colleagues, Andy Hargreaves, Michael Fullan, Yong Chao, Diane Ravitch, many others who have been looking at their own education systems, and others have concluded the same things. So very, very quickly, some of these, like I selected my top 5 reasons why, what has kept some education systems, like the United States, like England, Sweden, Australia, now New Zealand, and some others, not getting significantly better in terms of their educational performance. The first one is that probably most of these education systems have built their policies around the idea of competition, that when the schools compete, they somehow improve what they do, and when they improve what they do, the teaching and learning gets better, and the system gets better. This has been a very common view. It's still a very prominent idea in many education systems, and that has been shown through research as not to be the very good idea. In other words, the building education policies and reforms on this idea of schools competing against one another, or teachers and principals competing against one another, there's no evidence that this has been a good idea. Then the second one is the idea of standardization. Some people have thought that the problem is that we don't have high enough standards or clear enough standards in our school system for different subjects or teaching or curriculum or many other things. And that's why this standardization movement has been a kind of a solution. And this is a very common thing in the United States and England, and even in countries like Germany, here in Australia and other places. And again, we now know that if we drive the educational improvement by standardizing things, expecting that everybody will work towards the same and similar standards, particularly when it's combined with this competition, it hasn't really been successful anywhere. Then the third one is the idea of test-based accountability as a driver of these education reforms and policies. This really refers to two things. One is to use increasingly standardized student assessments and tests to hold schools and principals and teachers accountable for what they do. This has been now done for the last 20 years, and we do know that the test-based accountability idea as a driver of education reform and policy has not succeeded. It hasn't been successful anywhere. Just look at some of those countries where it has been exercised heavily, like, again, the United States or England, where it's very clear that the test-based accountability has led schools and school systems into trouble. The fourth one is the deprofessionalization of education, which means that in some countries the classroom work and school leadership has been open to anybody basically who is interested in working in school or has some experience in education previously. So we have seen a lot of programs and initiatives that opens the teaching profession to people who have no experience, no teacher education or training, which I refer to this deprofessionalization here, that the teaching profession becomes non-professional rather than professional profession. There are experiments around the world where school leaders, for example, could be hired from any other field of management or leadership, not necessarily from education. Very common thing in many of these education systems, in some places more than the others. And then finally, the school choice as a driver idea, again, for improving educational performance. School choice here means that in some places people believe that when parents have a freedom to choose the school for their children, the system will get better. This leads back to competition, and this often promotes and comes with the privatization of education as well, hoping that this somehow would enhance the quality of education. Now, I say that there are a number of other things, but these are common things when we go from education system to education system where the system has, where the performance has not been what was expected. So the next question, of course, is, and equally important, is that, so what could explain the good performance in those education systems that have done better? And interestingly, this is where the Finland comes into the picture, because the many of these characteristics or features that we believe have been driving and are driving system-level performance are almost the opposites of what you heard before in these other countries. For example, most of these successful education systems 10 years ago and still now, they have strongly kind of redesigned their school system and schools to focus on collaboration, cooperation, networking, sharing, helping one another, seeing education as something that we do collectively together rather than compete against one another. This is a strong feature of the Finnish system. We often say that this is the kind of foundation of what has made Finnish education system perform so well. But it's also the same thing in Canada. It's the same thing in Singapore and Japan, and now increasingly places like China, Estonia, and some other countries, where collaboration actually brings the results and quality into schools. The second one, rather than standardizing teaching and learning or standardizing schools, these successful education systems have been looking at flexibility, creativity, customizing their work according to the needs of the community, the needs of the kind of the capacity of the teaching staff in the schools, and trying to bring the kind of creative solutions into running the school. And this is a very different mindset than the standardization that assumes that everybody will will work towards a similar and same standards, and often in the same and similar ways. If you look at some of these education systems, these world-class systems, more successful systems have been looking at creative ways, new ways, trying to empower the communities and teachers to figure out the best ways to do schooling. Then rather than focusing on test-based accountability, these more successful systems have systematically built trust in teachers and schools within their communities and societies, and try to emphasize the professional responsibility of what the teachers are doing. This is not to say that there's no accountability in these systems. Accountability is has a different meaning, even different word that is used, and it's a responsibility, professional responsibility that comes from the kind of ethical foundation and understanding of the moral of the teaching profession and teachers. The fourth one, again, is the professionalism in these systems, by expecting and assuming that only those who have come through proper academic preparation to become teachers and leaders are able to teach, nobody else. There are no fast tracks into the classrooms or schools in these countries. Teachers are prepared and perceived as medical doctors and lawyers and architects and designers and many others who have to go through a rigorous initial education in the universities and earn their credentials before they are given children to teach in the classrooms, in the schools. And finally, equity, focus on kind of a policy priority and focus on equity. That means that education systems should be fair and inclusive for all the children. I actually want to take a few moments and speak a little bit more about this equity, because if you really insist me and say that what is the overall big idea in Finnish education system that has made it what it is, I would say that Finland was one of the first education systems ever who really understood the importance of equality and equity in education, and that has systematically been working on that for the last 30 years, really. And before we can make more sense out of that, I would like to say a few words about that. So first of all, I think the big question is that what is equity? What does it mean? And if you're Spanish speakers, then of course you need to think about this word in Spanish. I'm a Finnish speaker, so in Finnish we don't really have the word equity. But since we speak English here, let me take this question in English. What is equity in education? Now, this is something that we all need to be aware of. And if you want to take this equity in education idea further in your school or school system, this is one of those first things that I really recommend you to do to make sure that we understand what we are talking about. Now, there are two terms that often come together: equity in education and equality in education. And they're different words. We need both, but they're different things. We often confuse and mix the understandings of equity and equality by using these words without making too much difference with them. But equality in education means that we treat everybody, so schools or children or people there in a similar ways. And in this image, you will see that if we have a system that is based on equality, it means that everybody gets the same thing. In a classroom, it means that every child gets the same type of instruction or homework or attention or materials or support or help. This is what is equal, that we treat people equally. But it's not necessarily enough to make sure that all these children, for example, or all the teachers would be able to succeed. Now, equity means that we need to look at who these people are, where they come from, what their abilities and life situations are. And then if the education is equitable, in other words, if it's based on equity, it means that we need to give each and every one of them what they need to succeed. And this is a big difference in schooling, and it's a hugely complicated in practice. Just think about this, that you have a classroom of 25 young students, children, and you want to make sure that what you do in a classroom is equitable. Then it means that you really need to understand what each of these 25 children need, who they are, where they come from. You need to know a little bit about what type of family situations they have. And then you need to be able to make a kind of almost like a diagnosis and decide what can you do, what you need to do to make sure that each of these children have what they need. This is what makes classroom teaching difficult. And this is why early childhood education and primary school teaching are much more complicated than in a high school or university, where you can basically just share information to students, assuming that they will get it and learn. But in early years, we need to pay much more attention to this equity. So this is one of these things that Finland has really been a forerunner in the world, helping people to understand what an equitable education system looks like. Now, you may ask that, so what is this equity all about? Why is it so important? You may even wonder isn't it so that if we want to have an equitable or equal education system, then it means that we have to sacrifice the excellence or quality? Now, this is what the OECD evidence is showing us now. This is what we knew already 10, 12 years ago, that quality and equity in education system can take place simultaneously if you have a smart, comprehensive education policies that you heard before. So this is a data from the latest OECD PISA study from 2018. And so I'm looking at the OECD countries that you can see there in this graph, and I'm looking at two different variables. I'm basically asking that how's the equity of this education system and quality of the learning outcomes linked together? Is there any association? In other words, is there any correlation between these two? And the OECD has been showing this already for more than a decade, that there is actually a positive correlation between growing equity and improving learning outcomes, as you can see in this chart. These countries are spread around this chart. The upper right-hand corner that you can see there, where this little lighter space is, that is where the world-class education systems are. Currently, Finland, Estonia, Canada, Japan, and South Korea. And they are those education systems, the only systems that we know now that has simultaneously high learning outcomes in reading, mathematics, and science, and strong systems equity, meaning that the students' success in school depends less on their family background, where they come from. And I can tell you one thing based on my experience working globally. Practically all the education ministers, all the systems of education now try to aim to be there, right there in the top right-hand corner, where these 5 world-class systems currently are. That's not possible just by focusing on quality of teaching and learning. We have to also think harder about equity of the education system, and that's where the kind of a complicated work begins. So you may want to look at this data if you're interested in from the OECD sources. So let me now come to the Finnish lessons. What can we take away? And this is a really hard thing because there's so many things that could be shared. This is also difficult because I try to avoid this impression that I said earlier that some people kind of link individual factors to high performance of the system, in this case Finland. For example, saying that thing X is behind the good performance in Finland. It's not that simple, but I'm going to share you 3 things that I think would be relevant and doable for you as well. If you think about them. Actually, these are the things that can be done anywhere. And some of them can be done fairly quickly and immediately, and some of them require a little bit more policy work or strategic thinking. So let me show you very quickly first what the Finnish education system looks like, so that you can have a kind of an idea what are we talking about. I'm not going to get into the details here. I'm just going to say that it's a very simple, straightforward system. First, it's 100% publicly funded. There are no private schools in Finland, no private universities. All the education is free. All the children basically go to the similar system, the same schools, and similar types of programs. Okay, there's a preschool at the age of 6 that is now compulsory for everybody. It's a half-day school that is following the early childhood education. That again is the universal thing. Everybody has by law access to and right to early childhood education. Primary education starts at the age of 7, so it's a fairly later than elsewhere, and lasts for 9 years. And then there's a secondary education that has 2 components, general and vocational education, and then this is followed by higher education. And remember, it's all free of charge. There's no streaming or tracking within the system, so we don't separate students in basic school or primary school to different ability levels or groups. It all mixed ability, socially mixed groups. That makes teaching in Finnish schools a little bit different than many other places, because there are so many different types of abilities and children with the backgrounds in the system. So this means that within the system, there's a huge focus on inclusion, special educational needs, individual support, and so on. The compulsory education in Finland ends at the age of 16. That is an interesting thing as well here. So the secondary education that you can see here is voluntary. So students go to upper secondary schools if they want to. Almost everybody does. 97%, 98% continue in an upper secondary education. And that's what the system really looks like. We don't have any standardized tests or assessments. There's no inspectorate. There's only one examination at the very end of the upper secondary education, but otherwise the system is run by teachers, the profession, very much decentralized, 310 local governments that own the schools, hire the teachers, run the schools, and the ministry has very light touch on the schools themselves. So lesson number 1, that says that build collaboration. So I selected this one for you because it is such an important aspect of Finnish education, and this is such a powerful thing in any education system, particularly in the times like this, when we are seeing more and more competition and race for the higher standards, where the collaboration often suffers. You know, the problem is here that the more schools compete against one another within the system, the less they collaborate, the less they share about what they do, less they help one another to get better. And this is not how the Finnish system works. First of all, I think it's important to avoid education policies that would somehow promote competition. And this is a task for the education departments or ministries to really go through the education policies, each one of them, and see whether these policies lead in practice to situations where schools would find themselves, or teachers or principals or children find themselves in a situation where they would kind of have an unhealthy competition. And this unhealthy means that, you know, if the competition leads to not sharing and helping others when you realize that there's a need to do that, that's not a healthy one. There's always room for some type of healthy competition that can be even linked to the quality of education. Then make sure that the teachers have time in schools to collaborate. This is a global, universal problem right now. The teachers are complaining that they would love to collaborate, work together. They're actually required to do that, but they don't have time for that in the schools. Here in Australia, typically teachers' working week is about 55 hours a week. It's probably the same over there. And if you ask teachers to collaborate on top of that, it's not going to happen. So we need to think harder. How do we make time for teachers to collaborate in each and every school for improving what they do, for thinking about the teaching and learning, and working with children. We have more children in schools now with the particular special needs that teachers need to find time to collaborate with them. And thirdly, encourage teaching methods or pedagogies in the schools that include cooperative learning. Cooperative learning has been one of my longest research areas since late 1980s, and it's one of the most powerful ways to help every child learn better in a school. It's a hard thing to learn for teachers, but it's a very powerful when it comes to practice and impact. So that's why if you need to underline, not mandate, but if you need to underline one method of teaching, look at cooperative learning, because it will build this culture of cooperation and collaboration within your schools, classrooms, and the systems. So this collaboration couldn't be more emphasized than here, because it's such an important thing. So lesson number 2 here is to try to engage schools, both teachers and students, in the curriculum planning, curriculum work there. This has been a fundamentally important part of the Finnish thing. It's still very, very little practice around the world. Curriculum reforms most often are top-down reforms. The ministry or the government redesigns the curriculum, sends it to the schools, and asks the teachers and schools and principals to implement it. And we know that this is a very hard way. It's almost never happens successfully, simply because many teachers don't own this new curriculum. It doesn't have too much meaning for them because they don't understand where it comes from. So that's why the lesson number 2, the first of them includes to avoid the top-down curriculum as much as you can. I understand that there has to be some leadership, some coordination from the top level, but it's better to think about particularly curricular reforms from the point of view of engaging schools. What could be the role of the schools be? In Finland, each and every school designs their own curriculum within the core framework curriculum provided by the ministry. When the teachers do that, they own it. They commit to implementing it much differently than they would if it was brought from the top. So that's why the empowering teachers through local curriculum, school curriculum planning is a critically important part. It is behind this success story of Finland, and this is something that can be done anywhere, not necessarily in the same ways as in the Finnish system. But we can engage teachers more, we can give them more role in designing the curriculum than we have now. And then the third one here is the include teachers, the students as well, give students a voice in regarding their own learning. This is what Finland is doing right now. The ongoing reform now is designed in a way that will engage each and every student in all levels of schooling, including early childhood education. 3-4-year-olds are now included in discussing their own learning, what they want to learn, why is it important, what they have learned, and so on. Then one more Finnish lesson, this is lesson number 3, and you probably guessed this, it's about investing in equity of education more than we do right now. Okay, so this is probably the most complicated of all of these lessons, but there's no Finnish lessons without mentioning this equity. So the first thing we need to do, and this is the system level thing, so now I'm speaking to all the system level audiences over there. Make sure that we allocate resources to schools based on their real needs. So we need to see what the schools are about to do, what type of communities and children they are serving, and then make sure that the schools have resources based on that. In Finland, we call this a positive discrimination of funding, school funding, meaning that we discriminate schools positively when it comes to money or resources or stuff, to make sure that those schools that need more resources and more help to be successful actually will get that. In the United States and many other places, this goes exactly the other way. the wealthy communities, wealthy schools have much more manifold resources than the others, even if they don't need all those things to do what they need to do. Redesign education for children with the special needs. Special needs education is still a kind of a second or third thing that schools are thinking about. But there's no equity in education without a well-thought special needs education. And not just how do we provide support for children with the special needs, but what does it mean? How do we define special needs education? And again, Finland has done that in a very different way. The kind of a breadth of the definition of special need in school is much wider in Finland than in most other countries, where special education often refers to a notable disability or something like that, rather than a kind of emerging learning difficulty or social emotional thing that children may have. So think about that. Make sure that you have a comprehensive, wide kind of angle that you look at the special needs, and then think about how to establish such a system in the schools. And then finally, include the health and well-being as part of each and every school's work. And not just an input that the children will get help in their health and well-being in the school, but also as an outcome. Just look at what Ontario or what Finland is doing, or other Nordic countries, where well-being, student well-being is actually seen as an outcome of schooling, not just an input, what the schools are doing. Still, around the world, health and well-being are mostly missing in schools. It's something that the social health sector will do. And if it is, it's almost always a kind of input. We do something rather than seeing how healthy and happy the children are when they have gone through education. So this is the kind of a scheme for the systemic approach that Finnish schools, each and every school in Finland do. It starts with the school meals. Every child will get a healthy 3-course meal every day for free in school. There's a health care, there's a dental care, there's a lot of physical activity, at least 1 hour every day for all the children during the school day, outdoors, play, moving, running, that is all linked to well-being and health. And every single school has what we call the student welfare team. That's a small team that consists of school principal, special ed teachers, psychologist or nurse, or some teachers as well. That is about to prevent things going worse in the school when it comes to individual students. So try to identify the kids early on, help them, and make sure that they're all happily on board and learning. So there's one more hidden lesson here, and I thought that you might be interested in this one before I close. And this is something that people often miss. You don't find this hidden lesson in any of the foreign analysis of the Finnish system, not even the OECD. But I'm going to share this with you because I think that this is interesting and important here. Now, Finland has been very successful in building a kind of a teaching profession or education profession that is a highly trained and highly professional, if you wish. And one thing that this highly professional education community in Finland, that is mostly teachers and principals, can do is to distinguish facts and myths. There's a lot of fake news again, or misinformation about education, what works and what should be done. And there's also a lot of facts. There's a lot of research and evidence around the world. And it's very important that we have a teaching profession, education profession, that is able to understand what is true and what is not. And this is one of those things that Finland has been fairly good at during the last 30 years, where all the teachers are trained at the universities to have a master's degree. So they read the research, they know their literature and books, and they know what's happening in other countries, unlike in most other education systems where teachers have much less that type of training. Now, for example, I could ask a question like this from you, or the Finnish teachers, and the question is this a fact or false? the most important single factor in improving quality of education is teachers. Okay, you have to read it again. The most important single factor in improving quality of education is teachers. Now, if I insist you to say that this is true or this is not true, what would you say? In a conference hall, I often see about half of the people putting their hand up saying that, of course, this is true, the teachers are the most important thing. And then there's another half who thinks that, no, it's not, that there are more important factors than teachers when it comes to improving quality of education. If you ask this question in Finland, most teachers, most educators would immediately say that this is not true. The teachers are important, but they are not the most important single factor. And they would probably refer to something like this, that is a fairly well-established research understanding right now. It's been actually, we have known this for the last 60 years almost. So if you ask that, what influences students' test scores in schools, in your schools or schools here in Australia or Finland? About 60% of that variation can be explained by factors that are outside of the school gate. In other words, there are things that teachers and schools have no control. It's a parent's education, the wealth of the family, the community where the children live, the children's social networks, the peers, friends they live with, and so on. Only about 10% of the variation is about teachers. Only about 10% is associated to the teacher factors, the teacher training, the teaching methods, you name it. And another 10% is about the in-school factors. Then there's about 20 to 25% of the unexplained variation. Whatever it is, it may be linked to in-school factors, maybe it's something else. But this is something that the teachers and educators understand very well in Finland, and I would say Nordic countries, that the school influence is relatively small. It's still strong, it's a still big one, and this is statistical thing, so I'm not talking about individual schools or children or teachers. This is a system level thing. And that's why, because Finnish educators have understood this for a long time, they also understand that if we want to improve the system, really make the difference at the level of the system's performance, then the best opportunities to do that are the system level variable, the system level things, not necessarily those related to curriculum or teachers' professional development or leadership or other things. These are important as well. But if we really want to move the education system to the next level, we need to think about the system level variables. And teachers need to know this. If they don't know, or educators, then they're going to hit the wrong tree, so to speak. So what can you do? And I'm going to leave you here very quickly 5 things that I would like to leave with you to think about in your own work. And I hope that this Finnish story inspires you and kind of is exciting thing and hopeful thing that, things can be done. Finland was able to do it. You can do it as well. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast, but there are things that you can do for that. You need to do the right thing, not just to do the thing right. And that's a big difference. So the first one, and there's 5 things very quickly. This is almost like a homework for you to think about when you move on. So first one, and all these 5 things comes from the Finnish experience. The first one, very important, is to make sure that you have a shared vision for education, that you understand what is education for, particularly in the times like this pandemic now, that we need to think about what is the education for? What do we see when we look at the 2030 or 2040, your school system, education system there? And without this vision, improving education at the system-wide way is going to be very hard, very difficult. I don't have any answer to what this vision could be, obviously. You have to do that, and everybody has to do their own vision. But there has to be one. We have to be working towards the same type of thing. You may look at different countries and different systems, what they have done, but then create your own vision. The second one is that we need to rethink, and you need to rethink what intelligence actually means. Until now, we often think that intelligence in school means that you are good in reading, mathematics, and maybe science, and that's it. That's how the school performance by the OECD is measured, and this is how schools are tested and measured in most of the countries. But intelligence is much more than just these basic core subjects and domains. Intelligence can be linked to arts, physical movement, thinking, many other things. And it's very important that we have a kind of understanding of the nature of these multiple intelligences in our schools. So that's why I'm saying that we should not ask how good is John or how good is a child in school, but rather ask how is the child, how is John good at school, and accept different ways of being good, being successful, being talented in the school. And that's a very, very important thing for the future as well. I think mathematics and science and reading are very important, but they are not necessarily that much more important than many of these other intelligences that can be really significant for children in their lives. The third one is that make the well-being and health a priority in education. Don't keep it as something that you do when there are problems or included in the schools where there are a significant number of children or parents who need help in this. Make sure that it's part of each and every school, every day, in different ways. As I said, well-being and health could be seen almost as an outcome of education. Finland is doing it very well, just like Ontario and some other countries as well. Let the children play. Make sure that we give each and every child, and by child I mean anybody who is 17 years old or younger in a school, time to play. Children play less now than they did, than their parents did. So time for play and quality of play has declined significantly during the last 20 or 30 years. And still, this is my current research field, is that when children play, they learn many of those 21st century skills, if you wish, that we want them to learn. And it's the easiest and cheapest way to really make sure that all the children can develop those skills that they need in their lives, to just let them play in school, encourage that they will play when they are not in school, okay? And this often comes with the work that the schools need to do with the digital gadgets, make sure that we teach children how to live safe, responsible, and healthy life with the technologies that we have around us. But we also need to have time for playing and moving outdoors. And then finally, as I started, don't imitate, don't try to be like Finland or do exactly what Finland does. Build your own Finland, create your own idea of what you want to do. Again, you can do that. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be fast, but it's doable. But copying another education system is a bad idea. So it's not going to lead to any successful things. So I hope that these 5 things can help you to start the way or continue the journey that you have started, and that it will give you new ideas, particularly in this time of disruption and complications. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope that this has served the purpose. The Finnish Lessons 3.0, that is the 3rd edition of my book published 10 years ago, will be available within the next few months, and it includes this story and many others for those who want to dig deeper into story of Finnish education. Thank you very much. I enjoyed speaking to you. I hope that this has been interesting for you. Thank you.
Señor Sahlberg, usted ha recalcado varios temas que otros también han expuesto durante estos 2 días. Hablamos de la colaboración, el trabajo en equipo, la flexibilidad y la igualdad y equidad, que no tienen el mismo significado, mientras que la igualdad significa brindar las mismas oportunidades para todos los estudiantes. La equidad se refiere a conocer a esos alumnos y profesores, conocer sus necesidades y condiciones de vida para poder realmente adecuar el modelo educativo. Tomando todo esto en consideración, ¿cómo han incorporado ustedes la educación digital en el sistema finlandés y cuál es su visión acerca de los ambientes de aprendizaje virtuales? Taking all this into account, how has the Finnish school system incorporated digital education in the midst of this pandemic? And what is your view on virtual learning environments?
Yeah, it's a great question about the virtual learning environment. The first notion is that this all happened unexpectedly in February, March around the world. So there's no education system that was prepared for anything like this. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's almost like a large social experiment on children. 1.6 billion children have been part of this experiment, and we are only now really looking at these outcomes. What has happened. The interesting thing is that there seems to be no best model, best way to shift into this remote virtual learning thing. All the systems they have done this in their own ways. In some systems there has been almost like a standardized ways of using particular platforms with the children, with the time schedules at home that try to kind of imitate what the school day would look like. And then, this is something that has been very common here in Australia. And then the Finnish way of doing this is on the other end, that is basically based on, leaving this decision to individual schools to decide, what is the best way to do that. I think an additional challenge here is that before we went into this pandemic and disruption and remote learning things, young people were spending already a significant proportion of their daily time when they're awake with the technology, with the smartphones and digital media and other things. And now this virtual learning has just added into that. And I think that what we are likely to see is that there are some parents certainly and probably young people as well who have found it a little bit difficult to deal with, too much time sitting down with their devices or computers and gadgets. And these are all the lessons that we need to learn from this when we are thinking about the blended learning models and virtual schooling in the future. That how do we do that, and how can we best build it with the more traditional active engagement of students. I was mentioning play earlier, that how the play at home could contribute to the remote learning when the kids are doing that. But it's too early to say anything like a final about how the virtual learning or remote learning has worked. Some kids have benefited from that for sure because of the way their learning happens, and some haven't. But we don't know any proportions or numbers of kids how this has happened here in Australia or in Finland or anywhere else.
Retomando el tema de la equidad, usted planteó que es de suma importancia lograrla. ¿Podemos realmente alcanzar esa meta en las actuales circunstancias, dado el ambiente virtual? You stress so much importance in ensuring equity in our educational system. Can we actually achieve equity in the virtual learning environment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I often say that this pandemic and current global health crisis has not necessarily created any new inequalities, but it has just amplified these pre-existing ones that already were there in our school systems over there and here in Australia and many other places. That this pandemic has just made this inequalities more visible, more concrete. For example, when the parents are trying to help and support their children at home when they're studying at home, or dealing with these complexities now that is taking place in many school systems, that people kind of realize that how kind of a powerful these inequalities can be. And I hope that this will also lead into a better understanding about the importance of equity and equality in the school system, not just valuing teachers, as it's happening in many countries now, that people realize how important teachers actually are. But this equity, understanding equity, is a very important outcome of this pandemic as well. But of course it goes far beyond making sure that all the children have access to the internet. That is very important, of course, or that they have facilities and equipment at home that they need for remote learning or doing homework. Equity is much more than that. But those things are definitely going to be on the top of the global conversations in a post-pandemic time when we will sit down and see that, how can we, if this would happen again, what should be done, and equity and equality will be a big part of that conversation.
Desde su perspectiva, promover la competencia no mejora el sistema educativo, y dio ejemplos concretos de países que aplican este método y no les ha funcionado. ¿Cuáles indicadores de desempeño usted recomendaría para promover una verdadera mejoría del sistema? In your perspective, promoting competition does not really improve performance in a school system. So what performance indicators would you recommend to drive improvement?
Yeah, I think performance indicators can be helpful in improving the work of the school, but they alone don't really make the change, make the difference. And this is a downside of the global learning metrics like the OECD PISA and others, that education systems and ministers seem to think that the PISA scores would be a kind of a reliable indicator of the quality of the system, and it's not. It only tells a fairly narrow area or segment of what the education systems should be doing. So, the PISA scores, just like in Finland and now in Singapore, many other places, that PISA is used as a kind of one way to verify the national findings and monitoring of the performance of education system. And this is a critically important thing, that no government should simply rely on international global learning metrics like PISA or any other in determining how good or poor the education system is. It should always be used as a part of the national monitoring system. So that's why I think over there, I don't know the details of the Dominican Republic situation when it comes to schooling and in this respect, but my feeling is that everywhere we need to think kind of a broader with these performance indicators and think about really what are the important outcomes of schooling. And that's why this shared vision of schooling is so important. That if we don't have any common vision of what education is, then we can use any metric, any measurement, anything, and just say that this is telling us how good or poor we are. So that's why I think there is also healthy to think about different aspects of performance. For example, the well-being is becoming increasingly important global indicator as well. It's not just how much children learn mathematics and reading in school. It's also how much the school can contribute to the well-being and health of the children. And I would actually argue that in a place like yours, this might be a very good indicator to be included in the overall performance of the school system. How the school, being part of the school, engaged in school, can benefit and help well-being and happiness and kind of life satisfaction and sense of belonging of young people. Because those things are then contributing to the academic performance, reading and mathematics and science as well.
¿Cómo podemos aprovechar su propuesta del aprendizaje colaborativo en un sistema de educación mixto? O sea, público-privado, como el nuestro, y en el que tal vez no todos los profesores han tenido las mismas oportunidades de formación. How can we take advantage of your proposal to focus on collaboration, taking into account that we do have a public-private system in which not all teachers have the same educational opportunities?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, it's one of those big questions here in Australia as well. That we have almost 40% of the children are in independent, non-governmental schools. So the question would be: is it similar in a place like Australia? Here, I think the first thing really that the governments need to keep in mind and high in their agenda is to defend the public education and the role of public schools, especially in a country like the Dominican Republic, and here as well. So in other words, the education policies and legislation and regulations have to be designed in a way that the public education and public schools don't suffer from the school choice and the private schools. I think this funding is a very important. I don't know exactly how the schools are funded over there, but I think it's important to make sure that the schools have resources based on their needs and not just who happens to be there in the school. But you mentioned cooperative learning. I think this is something. Cooperative learning in the classroom among children is kind of independent from what type of schools we are talking about. But if we can have a system where the collaboration or cooperative professional learning between the different sectors within the education system, like public schools and private schools, could have more kind of a deeper role in how the system has been run, that would be excellent. In some places, this is happening in some countries, but not everywhere. Again, like here or in the United States, it's not very common that the public school and the private school would have a partnership in, for example, developing teachers or teaching or professional learning in the schools. And if that is an option, if this is something that could be done, benefit actually both types of schools, but certainly the public schools would be the ones that would benefit from that type of thing. So I think again here is this time provides an opportunity to think outside of the box a little bit and see that how can we start to do things collaboratively more in the current settings without waiting for the kind of a next big change or something else to happen, and just go and figure out what type of things could be done collectively.
Finalmente, debido a la pandemia, probablemente tendremos que sacrificar parte del currículo de un ciclo escolar normal. ¿Qué materias debemos priorizar y cómo retomar el curso de lo pendiente una vez retornemos a las aulas? Because of the pandemic, we'll probably have to sacrifice part of our curriculum that would have been completed during a regular school cycle. What subjects should we prioritize, and how do we get back on track when we return to the classrooms?
Yeah, I don't know exactly. Yeah, I don't know exactly what you mean by going back on track. Maybe we don't need to get entirely back on track, because
Right.
The fact is that the many of the old practices, and old practices means the things we did 6 months ago in the schooling, have not really been successful. If you ask young people themselves over there or here anywhere, they say that the school is actually quite boring, and it's not. School is not doing things in a ways that the young people would like to do. So maybe we can really consider not going entirely back to where we came from, but use this opportunity to change the school and change the way teaching and learning is organized in the schools. I think one of those things that we need to be really pay a lot of attention is the question of how we understand and define intelligence that I was mentioning earlier. That now it's this old old model of intelligence is a really industrial way of thinking about intelligence or being good in school, or how the performance of education should be measured is only by reading and mathematics, and maybe a little bit science. That's not what these children need, particularly after the time like this, that they need a lot of different types of skills and competencies. And maybe now it's the time to really rethink again how to organize the schooling. I'm not saying that we should stop teaching reading and mathematics. Of course, those are fundamentally important things, but why not rethink and reimagine school so that there would be, especially in the early years, the primary school, that would be much more based on play and child-centered activities that have been proven in the research and experiments to be very powerful and often leading much better learning outcomes than the conventional teaching. Then, of course, when we move to the secondary schools and older children, where the young people already know a little bit more about what they want to do, what they want to study, where they want to work, that it's easier to organize those activities in the schools based on the students' needs. But I'm a strong advocate for a stronger voice for young people in schools. They need it and they deserve it as well. They need it there in your country and they need it here as well. And rather than asking what are we going to teach in the schools after the pandemic, or when we return back to more normal, is to ask how are we going to organize the schools? What's going to happen there, and what is the role of teachers and young people themselves? And maybe this disruption also that has caused the virtual learning or remote learning or learning from home helps us to understand a little bit more about what the school could be. That it's not just what we used to do, but it can be many more things. And the good thing is that some of those things don't really require any further funding. It's just about thinking differently and organizing schooling differently. Until now, we have often said that education reforms are expensive, that we can reform schools if there's a lot of money coming with this. But now, within the next 5 to 10 years, there's not going to be more money in education anywhere, not here or there or in Finland, anywhere. So many of these things, how we want to change the school, has to be based on just doing things differently without increasing the cost.
Gracias, señor Sahlberg. Han sido 2 días en los que hemos escuchado a expertos que, tras romper paradigmas de educación, han logrado transformar modelos tradicionales. Nos llevamos una carga de conocimiento y herramientas para mejorar nuestro sistema en el presente y el futuro, planificando procesos que incluyen el pensamiento crítico y el trabajo en equipo colaborativo, el uso de las tecnologías de información y comunicación en iniciativas educativas para aprender y enseñar, propuestas de la pedagogía por excepción, que plantea la necesidad de construir nuevas capacidades para el diseño didáctico, tomando en cuenta las desigualdades e integrando la familia y actividades de diversión en el proceso de aprendizaje. También aprendimos cómo aprovechar la pandemia para incorporar los cambios que requerimos en el sistema y cuáles paradigmas del modelo actual realmente no contribuyen al avance de los sistemas educativos alrededor del mundo. La importancia de la equidad en la educación, o sea, conocer las necesidades particulares de los alumnos y así adaptar el modelo. Repensar igualmente cuál es el contenido que realmente importa en cada caso y cómo cada país puede construir su propia Finlandia desde su realidad. De mi parte, ha sido un honor participar en Clarotec Educación. Me llevo un sinnúmero de herramientas que como madre y abuela puedo comenzar desde ya a implementar en el rediseño del modelo educativo en mi propio seno familiar. Para la despedida oficial de este evento, nuevamente con ustedes, el ingeniero Rogelio Viesca, presidente de Claro Dominicana.
Gracias, Alicia. Fue un privilegio tenerte con nosotros, al igual que todas las personas que hicieron posible este evento. Y a ustedes por acompañarnos en estos 2 días en los que recibimos una nueva y disruptiva visión de transformación del modelo de enseñanza, así como herramientas para enfrentar exitosamente el reto actual que se nos presenta como país en el ámbito educativo. Luego de escuchar a cada uno de los ponentes, el soporte que provee la tecnología requiere de la necesidad de sumar a ella la flexibilidad, la colaboración y la creatividad para hacer las cosas de manera diferente. Y se confirman como aspectos clave para disminuir el impacto actual en todo el ecosistema educativo y asegurar que continuemos el proceso de transformación hacia un modelo que funcione para niños y jóvenes. Deseamos continuar participando y apoyando la evolución del sistema educativo nacional, comprometidos con nuestro rol de habilitadores de la plataforma tecnológica que requiere la transformación obligatoria de todos los sectores productivos del país y nos confiere una responsabilidad que seguiremos honrando. Como todos, seguimos aprendiendo y ajustando nuestro día a día, operando de forma diferente y buscando cómo responder a las nuevas necesidades de nuestros clientes, mientras mantenemos nuestro compromiso de mejorar la calidad de vida de las personas y construir un mejor futuro a través de la conectividad y la tecnología. Me llena de satisfacción que nuestra empresa tenga la capacidad de apoyar las iniciativas definidas por los principales actores del sector educativo y ser parte de la solución. En Claro Dominicana, seguiremos invirtiendo en el despliegue de redes confiables que promuevan el desarrollo económico, la educación, la salud, la reducción de los impactos ambientales, la igualdad y la inclusión a través de la innovación y el desarrollo tecnológico. Esperamos que Claro Tech Educación haya sido de provecho para todos ustedes, los verdaderos protagonistas de este encuentro. Y les reiteramos nuestro compromiso para continuar conectando y facilitando la transformación digital. Muchas gracias y hasta un próximo encuentro.
Claro Tech Educación, soluciones educativas para el nuevo hoy. Llegó a ustedes con el patrocinio de Xiaomi, LG, Samsung, Alcatel, Huawei, Nordson, Dell Technologies, Secomsa. Con la colaboración de Cisco, Microsoft, Google for Education, Canvas, Blackboard, Moodle. Ministerio de Educación, Ministerio de Educación Superior, Ciencia y Tecnología, Educa. Claro presentó